everyone online. We're just waiting for one more person. We need 8 to move. Okay, with Director Minions, that brings us to 8 directors. So I think that lets us kick off right on time. So thank you, everyone. But please don't leave. That'll bring us to the agenda. So we'll call to order right at 10 o'clock. I recognize that we're conducting our business mostly in the territories of the Hupatchisut and Latishot First Nations and recognize and respect and appreciate that fact. And then also we're conducting our meeting in a hybrid format at the moment. So we do have people who are in the room today as well as people online. So we'll go around the table and introduce ourselves in the boardroom. And then from there, I'll just call folks' names out online. We do have staff present as well, but some of them are online, but they're also in the room. That's mostly to monitor what's going on, so I think we're in good shape. So with that, we do have an email address that people can send their questions into. That's responses@acrd.bc.ca. That's how we're going to receive any public comment at the end of the agenda, which is the question period. Okay, so with that, we can go around the table. So we'll start this way. Keep going.
Good morning, Heather Zenner, Manager of Administrative Services.
Mike Sparrow, Regional Rep for Cherry Creek.
Good morning, Mariah Coots, Regional Office of Job Government.
And Terry Fong, Chief Financial Officer for the Regional District. Good morning.
Hi, I'm Greg Willman. I'm a guest of the ACRD today, and thank you for inviting me, and we'll talk again soon.
Good morning, Bob Beckett, Area A Banfield Director.
Good morning, Cynthia Dick, General Manager of Administrative Services and Acting CAO.
Hello, I'm John Jack. I'm the Chief Counselor for WIT and the Chair of the Regional District. So that brings us into online folks. So Vida, do you want to start?
Vida Sitgat, Director for Area C Long Beach.
Thank you. Fred?
Thank you. Said my name, Fred Boyko, Electoral Area Director for Beaufort. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan?
Hi, Susan Roth. I represent the best interests of the people of Beaver Creek.
Thank you. And Kirsten?
Morning, Kirsten Johnson for the Tokwat Nation.
Great. And lastly, Director Minions.
Good morning, Shari Minions, Mayor for the City of Port Alberni.
Okay, so great. Thank you. We have everyone here. So that brings us into the approval of the agenda. I don't believe we have anything to add to the agenda. With that, could we have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Thank you, Director Beckett, seconded by Director Coots. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? All opposed? Okay, motion carried. All right, that brings us into declarations. If anybody has any conflicts of interest or perceived conflicts of interest or gifts, although I think that's more for the board. Seeing none, we'll move on to minutes. 4A is the Committee of the Whole meeting minutes for May 8th, 2024. A motion to approve. Thank you, Director Beckett, seconded by Director Sparrow. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? A motion carried. Thank you. All right, so that brings us into item 5, which is petitions, delegations, and presentations. We normally have a 10-minute maximum for presentations and delegations. However, if we hit that 10-minute mark, I'll just hit pause and ask the board if we can continue on. From my understanding, Mr. Willman doesn't have a presentation, and he's just seated at the table with us because it's a bit easier that way because he'll have his own mic. That being said, it's likely he'll have quite a few questions, so we'll probably go a bit beyond the 10 minutes after his presentation, so that's okay. But once we get to the questions and answers, it'll just keep going until it ends, or I cut it off, which I probably won't do. With that in mind, we'll continue on, and I'd like to thank and welcome Mr. Greg Willman from the Lady Rose Marine Services just to talk about the service itself. So please go ahead. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, everyone. And I'll thank Bob first for inviting me and also as well providing some questions. I'm sure there'll be more after this, and I'll be as transparent as I can, and I'll answer anything I'm able to. So shall we start with the ones you sent, Bob, with that? Yeah. So I'll start with the story, and I'm sure many of you have heard it that just prior to taking over on September 1st, 2021. It did make a lot of news coverage and things like that. So I apologize to the ones that have already heard the story, but for those of you who had, I'll give you a little refresher, I guess. So a little history first on myself. I was born in Nanaimo. I spent the first 12 years of my career with Budget Rent-A-Car, actually in Port Alberni. That's where I developed some roots in the valley and also a love for Bamfield. We did a lot of boating when we lived in Port Alberni, so Bamfield was our favorite spot, that and the Broken Group Islands. So I've always had a soft spot for the Alberni Valley and also the Broken Group Islands, Alberni Inlet and so forth. So to speed up to, it would have been about 2018, we bought it was actually 2017 to be exact, but we bought a home in Bamfield, and prior to that we had a couple larger boats, and so we sort of cruised around the west coast of the island during the summer months, and the last boat we had it moored at Argyle Pier, which is part of the Lady Rose Marine operation, the small marina there. So one day we were headed, it was in 2021, and we were headed go down to Bamfield for about 10 days. It was middle of August, and Mike Sorrell, the owner at the time of Lady Rose Marine Services, was helping me unload my truck, and asked him how things were going, and he indicated, well, not very well. He said, COVID's finally got the best of me, and I've sold to Francis Barkley, and I'm shutting down the service as of the end of August, and I'm going to sell the property to somebody who had somebody interested in putting a hotel there. So I said, well, just hold off a little bit. I said, we've got to get going here, but when I get back, we should talk. I mean, before you actually sell the service. I said, would you consider selling it? And he said, yeah, I would if you're interested. That wasn't my plan. So anyway, I got back 10 days later, which was on a Sunday, the week before the 1st of September. And I was at work on Monday morning, and our manager at Port Alberni sent me an email saying the Lady Rose and Francis Barkley, Lady Rose Marine and Francis Barkley, they were shutting down. So I phoned Mike, and I said, Mike, you were supposed to wait and talk to me. Well, I couldn't wait. So that was on, I don't know the exact date, but as I say, it was the last Monday before the end of August. So I said, well, why don't I come up tomorrow? We'll get together for lunch and we'll still talk about this. So I met him for lunch, and by 1:30 that day, we had an agreement in place for me to purchase the Lady Rose Marine Services, which operates Francis Barkley, of course, and Argyle Pier Limited, which owns the property where we operate out of. So we had a handshake, and I don't think Director Jack, you were on the call back then, but Mike had a call, I think you were on it, Bob, but Mike had arranged a call with the ACRD and most of the First Nations groups that were affected by the closure of the company and shutting down the Francis Barkley. So of course he introduced me at that meeting as the new owner of the operation and that I wouldn't be shutting it down. So it was a fairly short call because it was really just more or less just to assure everybody that we were continuing on. So that was September 1st of 2021. So I'm in my third year of operating it, and I've had so many accolades and recognition from people, and that's not why I did it, but it was very much appreciated. Mayor Minions was one of the first people to reach out to me and asked if I'd come in and meet with her and the city manager. Bob, I think you were standing on the dock, the first sail in September when I'd taken over, and everybody met me on the west side. So that brings us to where we are now. So that's the short story of how I ended up doing what I did. And I don't know if anybody asks or if anybody has questions now on that part of it, or we'll just continue on.
So we can pause and see if anybody has any comments or questions. So you do have we do have a list that I think Bob put together of questions that he might like asked and answered. So we can go through those, Bob, if you like.
Yeah, I think.
Microphone.
Sorry, I think it would flow. And then if folks do have any questions, they can jump in.
So we'll give other folks a question first, and then either you or I can go through these questions if you want. Okay. Any comments or questions? Director Boyko? Okay. All right. So it seems like I think you've already described the process of buying the Lady Rose Marine Services. Another question is, what have you come to discover about the business? And please elaborate on the difference between freight and passengers. How has that gone?
So I've learned an awful lot. So I have been I've been a principal of Devon Transport Limited. We operate a bunch of rent-a-car franchises and storage facilities in British Columbia. So I've been and I've been the managing partner of that. So I'm not new to running a business, but this was certainly a lot different. So the first thing I found out or learned is how much bureaucracy and inspections and rules and regulations that we have to go through to keep the ship certified and running. But I'm pretty up on that. And I should say that the previous owner, I left that out of my original notes there. But so Mike Sorrell did agree to stay on for 1 year and run the company as general manager. We extended that to a second year, and actually into the third year. He officially retired the end of May. So it worked out fairly well. I had somebody that had run the company for almost 14 years before I bought it. So I did rely on him more so. But we've got through that type of thing. And as I say, it hasn't been difficult, but there's been some challenges along the way for sure.
Thank you for that. Do you find that the improvements to the Banfield Road have impacted your business at all? Has it changed that balance?
Yes. And I will elaborate. I think it's great for obviously the Banfield area, the Ojai thing. I had concerns right from day one because, of course, the west side of Banfield hasn't really changed on that side so much because obviously the road doesn't go there, and that's one of our priorities is getting freight and passengers and the garbage in and out on the west side. But so haven't got into a summer yet, but to answer your question, we've been tracking since it, as we all know, it started up just before the the road opened up just before the long weekend in September. And so our passenger counts are down about 26%. And freight, more so, freight's about 33% down, so substantial in that area. We've got a fairly good booking for the summer. Obviously, the summer months is huge for the tourists. So these other months we're talking about, not a lot of tourist traffic during those months. So it's really mostly like residents and just the day trippers, I'll call it. But I attribute it to a lot of people now can obviously take a nice drive down there and spend more time than they can if they come down on the trip on the Francis Barkley. So those are the stats. I'm hoping that the passenger count during the summer months won't be down near as much because we are really a tourist destination, so to speak. It's incredible how many people come during the summer from Europe and all over the world, and they're here to take a trip on the Francis Barkley.
Thanks. With that, do you see an opportunity to include Ucluelet or other destinations on your routes?
As far as Ucluelet goes, I don't see that in the future. The main reason for that, the previous owner, that they did sail to Ucluelet 3 days a week. So it meant having 2 crews to do that. And he also owned the lodge near the Broken Group Island there. So he used the Francis Barkley to deliver all his freight and things to the lodge and or the resort, whichever you would like to call it. And then he'd carry on to Ucluelet. There was never really a big demand for passengers to go past the lodge. So unfortunately, it was shut down, of course, during COVID, and somebody approached him to purchase it. So he sold I think he sold the lodge in 2020 when I purchased the companies to take over the Francis Barkley. I did approach the owners and tried to buy it back, and they didn't want any part of it. So it's kind of a family run business now. So and we're going to get into the government and the BC Ferries subsidy, but the Ucluelet route wasn't subsidized, so it was only the inlet and Banfield. So quite frankly, it would be very difficult to hire another crew. We're having trouble enough finding crew members for the 3 sailings a week we do, and it would be a money loser. There's no doubt about it.
So I do think that Banfield, the services provided, especially to Banfield, but even to Hooyah, they're still quite valuable, and it should still be considered an essential service, especially in times when there's an emergency. I think that's something we need to consider. That being said, what kind of support would you like to see in the form of letters of support, engagement with BC Ferries or the provincial government, or any kind of communication would you consider very helpful and valuable on your end from us?
So on my initial Zoom call that I spoke about, I had many offers at the time. I didn't really get out and meet everybody. I did meet, as I said, Mayor Minions. I did have a meeting with Chief Watts from the Shishot band, and so it really came down to they were great offers, and I'm certainly in a position if I ever need the help, I'd reach out and ask for. So far, my dealings with BC Ferries, which is sort of the go-between with the province, have gone very well. I haven't had a lot of resistance. We'll talk about that next. So at this point, because I did need extra funding, but again, I'll talk to you about that. But so far I haven't needed, so I don't know that there's really thing at this point other than, and Bob knows a bit about this because Transport Canada is trying to rid themselves of the West Dock, which I understand that you folks purchased the East Dock many years ago. And so I do have a little bit of concern with that, in the fact that if it comes under private ownership, you know, what happens to our fees to allow us to dock there? Will they allow our passengers on and off, unload freight? Because there's absolutely nowhere else on the west side where we could dock if we had to. So that's my understanding, and Bob may know a little bit more about that than I do at this point, but I know there's talks going on with a potential owner of that. So in the near future, I may need some help, especially from the ACRD.
All right, thank you. So I think I'll leave off with a question about tourism. Do you see expanded tourism business opportunities through Lady Rose Marine Services? If so.
I do. We've been approached by a couple of tour companies, and that would bring the Ucluelet loop back in. There's a couple of tour groups that do take bus tours out to the Ucluelet Tofino area, and they've approached us, and we're certainly interested in talking to them, where they drop their passengers off in Ucluelet, and then they make the trip back to Bamfield on the Francis Barkley. So if we could set it up on off days, but it wouldn't start a regular sailing route, but I think we'd be able to, hopefully, if we could carry more passengers, we could still open it to some of the public as well. Besides that, then we had a fairly antiquated website, and I welcome you all to take a look at the new one. We had a new website designed a little over a year ago, and it's really helped with our contacts, and we don't do online bookings at this point. That is our plan to do that, but it's really increased our interest again from the tourist side of things. So and maybe there's something one day that there could be some bus tours now that the road's done, where people would still like to travel the Francis Barkley at least one way, and there might be some opportunities there too. I haven't been approached by anybody yet, but I don't think there's really any tour companies doing a loop into Bamfield at this point.
Thank you. Director Siga, did you have a question or comment?
Thank you very much. I just, with our new bike path that goes from Ucluelet to Tofino and through the park, I think there's real potential for saving traffic going through the Port Alberni to the west coast, if they can put their bikes on the Francis Barkley and then have a hotel set up on the Ucluelet end. I think there's really good potential for that, as well as with the bus tours.
No, good comment. And I do feel that would be something we could definitely look at some point. It would probably, to do it with the existing crew we have, we could probably do one more sailing a week without getting into, as I say, double crews. So as I say, if there was something eventually with a tour company and with the cyclists and that, but it would, I'm just doing really quick numbers in my head, but to make it viable at all for us, we probably need somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70 passengers to make it a viable, like a viable day trip into Ucluelet and return.
Thank you. Any other comments? See none, I have a couple. So as time moves by, I think what we might want to do is potentially have a conversation about the kind of Bamfield Services Committee being a place where we communicate with you. That would mean that there's an interface with Hooyet as well. So we're undertaking a master planning process to really capitalize on property development in the private lands that we own. So we're hoping to see much more economic development in a way that's principled and like keys into the culture and geography of the area. But as that economic development comes online, that may change the metrics for you, and what actually may be popular or in demand may change slightly. I don't think it'll change too much for West Bamfield. I think that's enough of a cultural center in and of itself that it won't change as much as other places might, just given that they already have established their own culture. But the Hooyet investments that we're going to make in our own territory, as well as in the private lands that we own in Bamfield, that may make having a more walkable experience in Bamfield mean that there are more people willing to take the Lady Rose over as well. And I think Director Stiga said this very directly, is that that kind of feel, that kind of vibe is going to vibe really well with Euclid Tofino as well, which means that you could see a linkage there perhaps in the future. I think we should continue to have good conversations about that, especially knowing that there is an impact with the Bamfield Road reconciliation project on what's going on. Having the marine services still exist in a way that makes sense, and still continues on to provide that underlying foundation, I think will be still necessary. So the more conversations we can have, the better off I think we'll be. Okay, thank you. Director Beckett, did you have anything else you'd like to leave off on?
There is one concern that I have shared with Greg and Daniel, and I did set up a meeting with BC Ferry staff recently to identify that when you are discussing your contract, which I believe is a 4-year term, Greg, is that BC Ferries identified that there was a public consultation process. And you know, I was quick to point out that we weren't aware of it. There was no consultation with the ACRD, and it's something that I think we would like to be involved in, and at least have an opportunity to do a check-in with our communities and you, Greg, the operator. So that's just something that I think is important. And I know that you have signed another contract, which is fantastic. But before we come to the end of that, and before you hopefully renew that again for another 4 years, I think it's appropriate that our board have some discussions about the value benefit, especially if we add on emergency services, alternate routes. What happens if we have a significant wildfire that's impacting, those communities along the inlet, not just in Aqua and Bamfield. So I think those are important conversations that we should be involved in, that I think would be also provide support for you as you move forward in negotiations. And then I'll just jump right to I'm so appreciative that we've got you, Greg, taking on this investment and this service, and we're grateful for all the things that you've done for our communities, like offering free rides in the past at Christmas time to the local communities. Those are the type of things that speak highly of your business approach. So thank you for that.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So the piece about the public consultation, I wasn't aware of that, and I don't think there was any. Now, they may have gone out to a few of the residents, possibly, but not that I'm aware of. So that's the first I ever heard that there was any kind of public consultation during because our negotiations went on for about 6 weeks altogether. But definitely that would be really important. As I said, I got what I wanted in the end, but it might have been a little easier if if the ACRD was involved and some of the other stakeholders that are affected by the service as well.
Thank you, Director Cote.
Thank you so much through the chair for your presentation. Probably no one here knows that I used to work on the Lady Rose. I was the cook for a season. It was 7 days a week and there was only one crew. So difficult to manage that whole season because it's all summer without a day off. I remember seeing how people relied on the Lady Rose through that season that I worked there. I'd like to know approximate numbers as to how many people that the Lady Rose actually does service, because it's not just those two communities at the end of the line. It's all along the canal. There's a lot of people that live full-time along in those areas. And I can remember also when the Lady Rose was closing and how people were just dazed because it's like, how are we going to manage? How will we manage going forward? It is an essential service. So thank you so much for stepping up. And I'd really like to see the ACRD involved going forward to make sure that this service stays affordable and accessible for all those people along the line. Thank you.
So thank you. If you're ever looking for a part-time job, we do sometimes get stuck and not have a cook.
No, thank you. I cooked enough grilled cheese or cheeseburgers and milk. No, thank you.
So the question about the numbers we service, I mean, somebody in this room may have a better idea than I do. So obviously West Banfield is that's where we deliver the most freight, and obviously we deliver the mail there as well, medicine, that type of thing. So and full-time residents, I think is still around 50 on the west side, I think, but it spikes up obviously in the summer months. And then of course on the east side, I understand there's about 300 year-round residents total on that side. Uchucklacet Inlet, Kildonan is a big part of it. We deliver the mail into there 2 days a week as well. So, I mean, I'm going to say that it definitely affects 400 to 500 people. And I could get you the passenger counts. I don't have them in my head, but I get a report every month on, because we have to give it to BC Ferries. And if it was something you'd like me to share with the group, I'm happy to pass it on to you. So give you an idea on a monthly basis how many passengers we actually carry.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, so on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you for your presentation and the good question to answer period that we had. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks again for inviting me anytime. And I will take you up, Chair, with your suggestion about us getting involved in a little bit more of what's going down in your territory. And yeah,
For sure. And we'll maybe we can connect on seeing if there's a council meeting kind of equivalent conversation that we can have with the Hawaii Council.
yeah, I'm in Banfield a fair amount, obviously with the place there, but I'm happy to make a trip down and attend one of your council meetings. That would be excellent.
That's great. Thank you very much. So that concludes our petitions and delegations and presentations, item 5. That brings us into item 6. There's nothing for correspondence, nor anything in item 7, request for decisions. We do have an 8A, which is a discussion on the ACRD grant and aid program. And so we'll go right into that. So this is item 8A. Heather, did you want to take us through it and then maybe trade off to Terry when it makes sense?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. So Terry's going to bring up a presentation. So we're going to walk you through a discussion today on the grant and aid program. So we heard from the board during this last budget season and previous budget seasons that you don't love the grant and aid program. That's no big surprise. So today, we're not here to present you a new policy. We're just really here to gather your input on some proposed topics that we have for you. And then we're going to take your feedback today and go away and likely do some more research, come back again and present ideas to you. And then the goal would be to come back with a policy for the board to consider sometime this fall so that we can share this information with the communities. And then implement a new grant and aid program for 2025. Next slide. So today, I'm going to go through the grant and aid policy, the current one. I'm going to go through some legislation that guides our grant and aid service. And then I'm going to share some examples of what other local government grant and aid programs are. I'm going to share what we heard, and then we're going to have some alternatives for discussion. These are some of the questions that I would like you to keep in your mind and give consideration to as we go through the presentation today. So do you support the idea of separating the grant and aid process from the budget process? So having it on a different timeline? Do you support, or do you want to limit grant and aid applications from registered nonprofits versus just nonprofits? Do you wish to see additional details in the grant application to further understand what grant and aids will be used for? So having a stricter application process with staff review. We'd like to understand what post-grant expectation requirements should be. We'd like to have consideration of grant and aid applications from nonprofit leaseholders, example, airport leaseholders. Consideration of multi-year funding agreements for specific organizations. Give consideration to the flexibility of duplication of services with higher levels of government. And I'd like to also discuss a double dipping requirement. So the authority for grant and aids is given through the Local Government Act and the Community Charter. So the local government allows us to the Local Government Act allows us to provide assistance for the purposes of benefiting the community or any aspect of the community. The local government also puts a limit on the amount of assistance that we can provide. So there's a mathematical formula. The max in 2024 that we could give in grant and aid is $1.19 million. And as you know, we awarded $300,000 of grant and aid money to different organizations this year. The community charter restricts local government from providing a benefit to any type of business. So that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about nonprofit organizations, not assistance to any type of business. So the current grant and aid policy provides grant and aids once per year, and it can be for one electoral area or the entire region or any combination of those things. Eligibility must be from a nonprofit organization. They must be local, as in within our region. They must provide social enrichment. It's got to fill a need in the community. And it's not to subsidize activities that are the responsibility of another level of government. And there is a no double dipping requirement. Grant and aid applications are currently due on January 31st. And the application process includes filling out an application form, submitting their annual report, also submitting their current year budget and the last year's financial statement. And highlighting any other funding that they've received. And then just a simple description of what the grant and aid would be used for. The manager of finance reviews each application to ensure eligibility and correct documentation has been submitted, but they aren't reviewing and making recommendations to the board. That's really a board decision. Applications are then presented to the whole and the board prior to adopting the financial plan. Applicants are notified if they've been successful in April of each year, and then the funding is awarded on August 1st each year. Final reports are due in December. As well, grant and aids are not guaranteed from year to year, and the goal is for organizations to become financially independent and not rely on this grant and aid funding from year to year. Next, I just wanted to highlight some of what other local governments do. So there are many different options and different combinations. Lake Country's municipality, they offer grant and aids, fee waivers, different types of operating grants, grants for using their facilities, community engagement grants. RDN has a number of different grant programs that people can apply to. The Sunshine Coast Regional District has grant and aids for their electoral areas only. Their municipalities don't contribute. If somebody has a grant and aid application, they either have to choose to apply for the EA grant and aid or to go to the municipality. Next slide. And then there are some more examples of what the city of Port Alberni does. They have a community investment fund. Cathet Regional District has grant and aids for electoral areas, Powell River and Willamette Nation. They also offer multi-funding year agreements. So the purpose of showing you these is to highlight that there's many ways to do grant and aid applications. I think there's challenges with each of these, and I wouldn't recommend that we necessarily duplicate any one of these programs because I think there's challenges with all of them. So some of the research that I've done is to pull out pieces that I think might have value, and so we're going to discuss some of those things today. I do want to talk about what we've heard from the board over the years. I do want to talk about where we are aligned. So there wasn't a lot of alignment, I would say, but there are some pieces that are important to share. So there was alignment that we shouldn't be providing ongoing annual funding through the grant and aid process. There was support for having a one intake per year, which I would recommend to keep. And then treaty nations contribute to grant and aids as desired, although this is not specifically written into our grant and aid policy, but it seemed to have worked fine up until now. So the first discussion point that I would like to have is the requirement regarding being a registered not-for-profit or not registered. So I want to explore this further, and I will say that I am not an expert on this, but the information that I pulled onto this slide is pulled from the province's website. So it states that not-for-profit or nonprofit organizations are known as societies. They have to follow the Societies Act. They have to have a constitution. They have to have bylaws. But it's truly nonprofit. They aren't benefiting financially, and all money that's raised is donated to the organization's cause or their goal. Societies do not have to incorporate, but incorporating has some advantages, including making it easier to get funding potentially for grants or that type of thing. And then there's also what's called a social enterprise. And they have similar goals to a nonprofit, but they can also distribute profit to its owners. So there's one called the Community Contribution Company, and we did have one grant and aid application this past year from a Community Contribution Company, and the board did not support that. So I would say certainly we want to not do that because we would be supporting business. So the conversation I would like to have and really get some feedback from the board is, do you want to limit applicants to be registered or non-registered? Does that matter to you? Because currently in our grant and aid policy, it doesn't define what a nonprofit organization is. So there is no requirement for them to be registered, but that did come up in some of the discussion during the budget process this year. So I'm going to pause there and open it up for discussion on this one topic.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions? So I'll start then. I think it's right to kind of stay away from social enterprises just because of the way that complicates things. There are some organizations that are not incorporated and are small enough but worthy enough that we may want to consider keeping it open to regular societies and not just incorporated or registered ones. But I'm open to that conversation. Oh, Susan, please go ahead, Dr. Roth.
Yeah, I'm thinking that I'd like them to be registered nonprofits, mostly because they have better financial backup and more requirements as a registered society. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Director Boyko, next, please go ahead.
Thank you. I agree that things should be a registered society as well. There's a couple other things we need to talk about here. One thing that was mentioned that Treaty First Nations can contribute as desired, but something changed on February 28th of this year when there was a vote driven by one of the members that's listening here that the grant and aid policy is being forced on areas that don't want to pay for it. So I'll give you an example. If you're living with a bunch of roommates and one of the roommates says, hey, I'm going to go get some Brussels sprouts and I'm going to bring them back in. I figure that you guys should use these Brussels sprouts, but you should also pay for them. And that's currently what's happening with the grant needs as they are right now. People are being forced to pay for things they don't necessarily want to pay for. So we need to make sure we're very, very specific on who pays for things and how that's decided. And that's what the area people want in that area to contribute towards, not what other directors want people to pay for. So we need to have a very serious discussion about this. So we're not forcing areas to pay for things grant need wise that they do not want to or desire to. Second thing, we need to talk about something like term limits for funding agreements. We all talk about people getting financially stable, but at the same time, there's nothing to say you can get this for 5 years maximum and then you're on your own. Some people have been getting grant needs for long times. One of the biggest one is going to McLean's Mill, $30,000 a year, which basically goes straight to the Chamber of Commerce. So there's things like that that we have to have a serious discussion about. But just getting back to forcing people to pay for things they don't want to, the public's watching what we're doing. You're getting hundreds of views on these videos every week. And when we hear rumblings about electorate areas wanting to leave the ACRD because they're being forced to pay for things they don't want to and services they don't want, this is one of the things that upsets people dramatically. So by doing this more and more, you're going to hear more about incorporation and more about people wanting to leave the ACRD. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the way that Heather has put together the presentation, some of the questions you've raised are actually in the presentation itself. So we'll maybe hold off on a couple of those. But definitely heard everyone on the regarding registered societies. Director Roth and then Director Minions, please go ahead.
Okay, so I kind of had an overall thing that I'd like to talk about. So perhaps I should wait till the end.
Yeah, I think we should keep it towards the actual questions that the presentation brings
Okay.
on.
Okay, I'll do some more at the end. Thank you.
And let's keep it about the grants and aid. And I think it's grants and aid, not grant and aids. Director Minions, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, I think it's important to not spread misinformation that the McLean Mill grant and aid absolutely does not go to the Chamber of Commerce. That is for capital funding only, and that money is managed by the city. The Chamber of Commerce does not have any ability to take on capital projects. They're actually not even they don't actually even lease the historic portion of the site. They're operating only, and the grants that we receive from the regional district and from Parks Canada, which are matching those funds, are only for capital projects. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Let's restrict our conversation just to the questions that are being raised by the presentation, and then we'll have more time at the end for all the baggage. All right, thank you. All right, Heather, please continue. Is it on topic? Please go ahead, Director Cote.
Thank you. So I'm not supportive of generalizing whether we do nonprofit or not for profit or nonprofit organizations. I'd like some examples of what we've provided funding for in the past. To defer or decide the difference between these these two organizations, because I think that generalizing really pigeonholes us and restricts us when we would like to actually support different organizations, nonprofit or not-for-profit. So
thank you for the question, and maybe we can get some clarification from Heather and a correction if I'm wrong. I think there are 4 permutations that we're talking about. The first of which is just a society through the Societies Act. And then there's an incorporated society. And then there's also talking about social enterprises, either benefit companies or community contribution companies. I think we're mostly talking about whether or not we want the societies that apply to be incorporated or registered or not. I think we're not even going to talk about benefit companies or contribution companies at all. So I think those are the 2 that we can stick to. Is that what you were getting at?
yes, it is. So like, if Sprout Lake wants to do a grant and aid for one of these organizations that you're saying that we shouldn't be providing grant and aid for, and I want to, how would I then have the ability to do a grant and aid for a worthwhile organization? Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So you asked a question about how many grant and aids were given to, say, registered or non-registered. And I don't know that question because our policy doesn't require it to be registered or not. So we don't check for that. I know one of the directors asked about one of the grant and aid applications this year, and I checked, and they were a registered nonprofit, but that's really not a question that we've ever considered. I've just brought that up because it was one of the discussions that came up this year. One thing I would ask the board to consider, though, is the Sunshine Coast Regional District provides small grant and aids to non-registered organizations in the amount of $500 or less. And then anything over 500 requires you to be a society to be registered. So that might be one option to consider and have it open so that, a small organization putting on a small event, they could access a small grant and aid fund.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. I think we should get through the presentation itself. We'll go to Director Minions and then Director Siga and then Director Sparrow, and then we'll go through the rest of the presentation.
Sorry, my hand was just up from before. I'll lower it.
Okay, Director Sparrow or Dr. Siga, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm totally in support of having registered society status because that provides some government oversight in that they have to present their budgets and their minutes and show that they have adequate membership. And organizations that are just ad hoc, I think there are enough funding sources out there that people can go to. I am in support of the registered society. Whether they're incorporated or not has no bearing on it. Incorporation just means they're managing bigger budgets as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sparrow?
Thank you. That my question was going to be sort of two-phased. One is like how many not-for-profit or non-profit organizations have we contributed to last year, but obviously you don't have to split them out that way. My other concern is how our community hall at Cherry Creek may be affected if we go one route or another. Are they a not-for-profit or are they a non-profit organization, or are they just a community hall? And how would that be affected if we went down one certain route? So I don't want to cut off the avenues for the funding for my area, but we have to distinguish how we're going to go through all this so we can do better funding in the future.
I think there's a society, but I don't know if they're incorporated. Yeah, okay.
Just want to clarify, like you asked about nonprofits, all of the grant and aids are to nonprofits. Well, I just want to clarify that they are given to nonprofits. It's just whether they are registered as a society, I don't know, because we've never been asked.
I think there's a difficulty in terminology because in the United States, they have not-for-profit and nonprofit organizations, and there's like a legal distinction between those two things. I don't think it's the same here. I think the not-for-profit organizations and corporations in the US are similar to our benefit companies and community contribution companies. So I think for the purposes of this conversation, if somebody accidentally says not-for-profit or nonprofit, they mean societies. Whether or not they're incorporated, it's a whole nother thing. Director Siga, your hand up, please go ahead.
Sorry, just forgot to.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, next slide, please, Terry. Okay, so the next question and for consideration is, would the board be open to uncoupling the grant and aid program from the budget timeline? So currently grant and aid applications are due at the end of January, and the review on these applications occurs at the same time as the budget process. And I'd like the board to consider delaying the intake of grant applications to April of each year, which would remove the grant and aid review from the budget deliberation process. So this would require the board to set a grant and aid budget for the year as part of the budget process. And then we would review grant and aid applications in late May or early June. There'd be no change to when the budget when the money is issued to the applicants, just a delay in when the applicants are notified. So budget season is a busy time with many meetings, and the grant and aid deliberations add to this load. And this is one idea to budget the grant and aids ahead of time, and then review the grant and aids in the spring after the budget's been passed, and only issue grant and aids within that approved budget. So you don't have to use all the budget, but you can't go over the budget that you've allocated. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Heather. I think I'm just going to add my comment up front before Director Boyko. I think this is the way that we have to do it, because then it uncouples the conversation about what taxpayers and what the different areas can actually want to spend and can afford. And then the conversation becomes about how we fit the grants and aid into that. And I think that's the way it should go. Director Boyko and then Director Roth.
Thank you, Chair. I think what you just said there, last sentence, was actually very important. So I agree with decoupling it, but if we do it by buckets, this Beaufort has a bucket and we're going to put in 5,000. And Sproul Lake's got a bigger bucket, they're going to put in 10,000. And then within your bucket of Beaufort, we can say, hey, we're going to put $100 towards this, and we're going to put $100 towards that. I think that's a good way to do it. That way you can keep the taxpayers happy that they're spending money on what they want to spend money on. We can take those couple meetings out of the February timeline where everything's meeting every couple days, just pass it out. And that makes sense. If we keep it as one big bucket of $300,000 and everybody's fighting over, well, this is going to go here, this is going to go here, blah, 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 blah. I see that as a total nightmare. And those are going to be some huge meetings with a lot of infighting. But if you have it in individual buckets for electoral area, I think that's a good way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Boyko. Director Roth?
I agree too. I think this last time Beaver Creek contributed about $50,000. I'm totally in favor of separating the grant and aid process from the budget process. I think it needs to be, we don't need to complicate the budget time with this. Thank you.
Yeah, and then we just settle on what that's going to be. Director Cote and then Director Sparrow.
Thank you. Because I've been through so many budgets, the regional district board in the past has pooled our money, which doesn't really work when you have individual buckets. So you could have individual buckets. There should be a communal bucket too, for the benefit of all of the regional district, because that's what we are as a board of the regional district. When something comes also similar to the tall ships, how would that fit into budget time when there's a request for something similar to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cote. Go ahead, Heather.
So, yeah, I just want to highlight a few of the comments are going to be addressed in the next slide. So how budgets and buckets work is going to be addressed in the next slide. So everyone's a step ahead of me.
Some of us peaked. Go ahead, Director Sparrow.
Thank you. I agree with decoupling it from the budget because it just makes more onerous in that. But ever thought of putting it before, like in December? Because, right now they apply to the city, they apply to us, and we're both sort of competing at the same time for the grant and aids, who's gonna get it, because you can't double dip right now. So I understand going after before is a good idea, but, let's see how that will work out. The other places, I know they put a communal bucket in, but the grant and aid program actually works a year-long basis. Somehow they don't dish it out all in May and June, they dish it out throughout the year as things become available. So, and also then we have the bands and their contributions. How are they going to fit into all of this within their budgets, into our budget? It would be better if we went before or after, right? Because I know you can contribute as you so choose, but wouldn't that affect your budgets too?
Yeah, well, like, for example, like who adds on the fiscal, so it would just come down to how we organize it throughout all of that. I think functionally before or after won't make too much of a difference. I think it's more a consideration around the load on staff and when the appropriate timing is there. But I think that may be addressed in the future as well. Heather?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment, Director Sparrow. The board can choose to do the grant and aid process when you want. The one reason we set up this timeline was to really not change the impact to when the money would be distributed to the successful applicants. So in this proposal, they'd still receive the money in August. So we just didn't want to make that change to the community.
Terry and then Director Beckett, I think.
Yeah, we did discuss putting it in advance. My hesitation would be even this year, there was a lot of discussion of can we see what the other budget impacts are going to be? And then we'll decide if we have the room to do the grant and aid. And so I feel like we would end up in a whole bunch of discussions where you're looking to see what the rest of the budget looks like and what your percentage increases are, because you don't want to commit too much. Whereas I think setting what these buckets, or as you were referring them to, is going to potentially be in the maximum that you're willing to do. And then it's like, okay, well, how much can we leverage for these societies out of this bucket? I think would be easier because we have to make sure that taking care of our own infrastructure and services is top priority, and handing the money out to grants. As much as I say these community groups are amazing and we need them to function in our community, we have to make sure we're taking care of our own infrastructure first. So I would be concerned about putting it in advance and then having some things at the board table then decided that they can't proceed because you've already committed that money to an outside user group.
Thank you. Director Beckett?
Thank you. I think Terry took the words out of my mouth. I think it's important, and other directors have alluded to it this morning, is that I see grant and aids should be a line item in the budget period so that we can, move forward, regardless of what bucket process we choose. So I'm 100% in support, and I don't care when we do it. I simply think it needs to be a line item in the budget.
Thank you. Director Sparrow, did you want to follow up? That's why I was wondering if Director Beckett should go next. No? Oh, okay, thank you. Heather, please go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm ready to move on if ever we're done with that topic. Next slide. Okay, so I wanted to bring up the topic of ability to opt in and opt out of services. Some directors have the option to opt in and out of certain grant and aid, and other directors did not support this approach, as when one director removes himself from an application, the grant cost is shared amongst those that remain. In 2024, we ended up with 12 different grant and aid service participant combinations, and I've shown them on the slide there. So different municipalities, EAs, TOQUATs, and electoral areas. So you can see the 12 that are listed. These were mostly created on the fly during grant and aid deliberations as each application was reviewed. An idea is to break down the region into set groups. So this would remove the ability to opt in and opt out. So for example, Group A that's on the screen, the board would determine who the participants are in each group, which would then be advertised to the public. This group would then set their budget at budget time. And then this group would only receive grant and aid applications that are relevant to their geographical area or whatever the makeup is of that group. And they would collectively make a decision on each grant and aid within their predetermined budget. There'd be no opportunity to remove yourself. So if you're in Group A or in Group A, but you have the ability to vote on grant and aids within your group along with your other members. I've shown 3 groupings on the screen, but it's just an example to show it could be way more than that. And it would be groupings that make sense to the board. One grouping would most likely serve the whole region. Yeah, so I will stop there and ask for discussion.
Okay, I think this is where we talk about the different permutations and bucket arrangements. Are we specifically talking about First Nations in a future?
Absolutely. First Nations needs to be discussed,
Yeah.
now as well.
So I think there's an instance where there should be some conversations around First Nations must contribute in certain instances, almost the same way that there are things that we're automatically a part of just through the treaty. I think some grants and aid types, and I really like the way that Lake Country set out theirs, is there are some that we should designate as this type of application is something that's relevant to the entire region. There are some that may be only relevant to the Alberni Valley or the West Coast or Banfield and Aquila and so on and so forth. And those are the types of things where I think we should really settle in on what those things look like. In addition to individual buckets, I think the policy would be we'd allow to have those kind of 3 processes in place. Everyone, groups, and then each individual, depending on how you want to put it together. It kind of complicates things, but really it comes down to there are some things that I think that we should all be contributing to on an operating basis or a helping to build things basis. And I'm thinking of things like search and rescue. So certain emergency services or certain services that positively affect everyone in the region are things that I think we can have a conversation around and make sure that everyone contributes to it. And then we just have a conversation about that category. So if we are a little more organized about it, then the better off we'll be. And then from there, we look at how we split off the categories into groups. Because 12 is difficult, but it just depends on how we look at it. All right, thanks. Dr. Boyko, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's difficult to figure out how to do this, but we got to remember that we're working for the people, right? We don't say, I want this, what do the people want, right? Now, if we're talking about, like you said, rescue squad and things like that, I think we can get a fair good idea when we talk with our constituents that they'd like to still have a rescue squad and support it. But we need to have some flexibility with this group as well. So we're making sure that we are putting taxpayer money to what taxpayers want, not what the individual directors want. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Director Roth, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. And when you bring up search and rescue, I mean, the applications come year after year after year. So it kind of goes against the idea or goal of financial independence for them. So maybe they don't belong in there. So maybe we need to look at that too. Maybe it's, I don't know, a new service area or something we'd do differently. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we may go in that direction as well, Director Roth, especially when it comes to certain services or like victim services. It's Alberni Valley, but it services the whole area, right? So those kind of things do perhaps merit their own services. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, it's coming up in the next slide. All right, thank you. Next time we'll just have you do the whole presentation first. Director Minions, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just wanted to speak in support generally of the idea of having predetermined groups. I think that makes sense. And then the group gets to vote and decide if they, as a whole want to fund that request or not. I think it takes a lot of the ambiguity out of who participates, and it goes back to what makes sense. And then from a service perspective, and then if the group does not want to proceed with funding that request, then they've got all the ability to do that. And I just wanted to confirm that I assume it would be one vote per director at this level. I just wanted to make sure that it's not weighted votes within the groups. Thanks.
I think the actual setting of the budget for grants and aid would be the weighted vote because it's part of the budget process. But the actual group conversations or voting on applications, if however defined, would be 1-to-1 probably. At least that's my understanding. Terry, what do you think?
Yeah, that would be mine as well. I think that it likely these are gonna go to the committee level. Like, I don't know, staff are kind of considering like, do we want an Alberni Valley bucket and a West Coast bucket? And then at that point, then you'd be bringing the Alberni Valley ones to the Alberni Valley Committee. And at that point, it would be a 1-to-1. So definitely if we set these groupings and we set the amounts, that would be part of the financial plan, and that is a weighted vote in terms of the total dollar value. But voting on each of the individual applications would then be one director, one vote. Probably not all sitting together. It would probably be brought to the specific groups of what that grant and aid service bucket is.
I think an important part of this, and I said this to Heather when I should have said it out loud, is that I think we should settle on some permutation of groups or groupings so that when applicants set out their application, they just don't check everyone's box. They have to pick one and go from there. Director Minions, and then Director Boyko, and then Director Roth, and then Director Sparrow.
Sorry, my hand was just left up again. Ignore me.
Okay, Director Boyko?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I still think we run the risk of people voting to spend other people's money that the taxpayers don't want if we don't have enough granularity on the groups. So, for example, if we have something come up that someone thinks is wide enough to encompass the entire Alberni Valley, but other people think, well, that doesn't really apply to other places, how do we decide on that so that we don't get people playing for things that they do not want and then getting voted into, like what happened in February of this year? So we have to make sure that if this is going to go this way, we have enough granularity and the decisions are made by people that are not deciding in the best interest of everybody, but are saying, okay, this is going to go. So when the grant applications come out and you have those 4 boxes or 10 boxes as opposed to 12, are we saying that people can't just select the top one of just say, pick everybody, then it goes to everybody, and then how are we going to decide the granularity? That's the key to this whole thing. Thank you.
I think it would be a top level look at some point. The way that it works in other organizations and I'm part of that gives grants is that if an applicant is clearly clicking that can apply, and it's clear that they're only providing services for 1 or 2 areas or subunits of that area, then their application is kicked back to them and they go try again, so that it doesn't even come to the big table. So there are ways to like address that in a way that makes it so that we're not wasting time and not allowing for those conversations to happen. Go ahead, Dr. Boyko. Just
as a follow-up, if that's true, who are the people that are going to be making those decisions? Is it staff or is it the directors? Because that's the key to how this is going to play out. Of if you're going to say the whatever group applies to the whole valley, or if it only applies to people that want to pay for it. That's the whole issue of what we're talking about here, is that one decision, who makes it and how it's applied.
I think that depends on how the policy is created. You do it in a way that is similar to how topics come up at the board table, and then the board ultimately makes the decision. But we do need someone to put together a briefing note that explains, hey, applicants 7 and 6 or 7 and 13 are trying to get money from everybody, but they're only active on the West Coast. So we recommend you don't do that because it doesn't fit with the values of the policy. And then if the decision is ultimately with the board, then the buck stops there. But we'd have to create the policy in such a way that it's obvious that, whoever's creating the briefing note can take those into account as time goes by. Thanks for waiting, Director Roth. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Director Boyko. I also think we need to recognize and understand that many of the nonprofits that request funds from regional district taxpayers have access to and often receive substantial funds from the provincial and federal government, sometimes millions. The regional district taxpayers' purse is small. And like in Beaver Creek, there's only about 1,100 tax-paying households to share that tax burden. So we really need to somehow figure out how we can separate this, you know, perhaps by taking a closer look at their financial statements. But it doesn't make sense for us, you know, especially like Beaver Creek with 1,100 tax-paying households, to pay into a company, or sorry, not a company, but a nonprofit that has the ability to access millions of dollars or whatever, a lot of money from the federal and provincial governments. So we need to figure that one out too. Thank you.
Yeah, there may be policy values or things you can put in the policy itself that kind of filter those out automatically as well. So that just comes down to figuring out what the language would be for that. So I think that can be dealt with in the way that the policy is put together. So from this, I do think that we're likely going to see Indigenous community being treated like municipalities on this as well, just because they have their own budgeting processes. So whether and to what degree we allow double dipping is going to be a conversation that probably includes First Nations there, because we have had groups come to Huu-ay-aht asking for money, and then they come to the ACRD asking for money. So there are ways that we can handle that at the ACRD level and so on and so forth. I do think, though, that we're not going to see that one-to-one granularity in everything or most things, Director Boyko, without incorporation, because at the very minimum, every electoral area director relies on every other electoral area for decision-making on things like planning. So I think that's the lowest level of granularity you'll see. And splitting out electoral areas or by region is probably where we're going to end up. But in some instances, there may be some benefit for like coastal or tourism based or something, right? We'll have to see what that looks like. But I think we can get to the next item, Director Boyko, quickly, and then we'll go on to the next slide.
Yeah, I'll just be quick here, but I still want to make sure that we're not making people pay for what they don't want. So for example, I know a lot of people pay for the Spur Lake Marine Patrol, and that could be considered a community benefit, but it always has to have the ability to address that and make sure that the individual voters in each area are heard. Thank you. I'll let it go.
Thanks. Terry, go ahead.
I think, Director Boyko, that the model that you are talking about and looking for is where each electoral area would just have a bucket of money each. And that would be it as our grant and aid process at the regional district. That would give you the ability to opt in and out. That is common in some of the other regional districts. And in those regional districts, the municipalities, there is no ability to apply to the regional districts for like regional grant and aids. So it's, if you want money from the city of Port Alberni, you apply to the city of Port Alberni. And if you want money from any of the electoral areas, then you apply to the regional district for those electoral areas. So that is definitely a possibility of a thing. It doesn't really take a regional approach. It also has region-wide then having to make 4 applications. And I know that the municipalities currently have their grant and aid processes set up that might look a little bit different and not permit such a things, but I do think that is what you're speaking to. Oh, and then just to go on to Sprout Lake Marine Patrol so that we don't have misinformation. Sprout Lake Marine Patrol was established, I believe, in like 2012 by a referendum that included all of the areas. So that was established by a vote.
Thank you. Director Minions and then Director Sparrow.
Thank you. Just wanted to note that the system that was just mentioned, I think would have pretty significant consequences for some really important regional initiatives. And just noting that the city contributes to several regional initiatives, like the farmers group and food security and things like that, that if we weren't contributing through the regional district, we would not be contributing. So if a system went to, you have to come to the city to apply and you have to go to the regions separately to each of the areas. I think that could be quite challenging. And I think it would leave a lot of our community groups at a loss of the city funds. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Minions. Go ahead, Director Sparrow.
Thank you. Completely different tact here.
Put your hand down, Director Minions.
Thank you.
Completely different tact here. So under number 10, area F. So I'll go back to the community hall because that's where most of the funding goes for Cherry Creek. if they were to apply for grant and aid, and it's only for area F, does only area F get to vote on it? Or does the whole board at the end of the day get to vote on it?
Right now, the whole board votes on, it, which is why we're having conversations about categories or groups or buckets and that sort of thing. So I think there's two different systems moving here, maybe even three. First one is everyone gets a vote. Second one is certain groups get a vote. And then the last one is individual directors can figure out their own budgets, which is mostly just EA directors because everyone else kind of acts like a municipality. So it just seems like it's going that way. I would just say some of the groups make more sense to be geographic than to be what we are legally here at the boardroom table. So like an Alberta Valley one rather than just an EA directors one, because VITA might not see the relevance of participating in something that's just about agriculture here, right? Stuff like that.
Exactly. So, yeah, so I'm trying to, so if the community board put a grant aid, and I said it's good for me, then it pretty well can get through the board because it's sort of an area F thing. I'm putting only money towards it, nobody else is. Is that right?
That can be an option.
Yeah.
Yeah. Director Roth, go ahead.
I'm curious about Sprout Lake Marine Patrol, just because I'm wondering, are they a registered society? And there seems to be where sometimes a bylaw is used and other times it's not. So maybe need clarification there for me. Thank you.
Carrie, go ahead.
So Sprout Lake Marine Patrol is the regional district. It is a service operated by the regional district. So it got brought into this nonprofit discussion, but it is actually a service operated by the regional district. The employees are regional district employees. It's not a separate entity at all. It's managed by ACRD staff.
So sorry if I just may ask, was it in this year's grant and aid? Was it one of them?
Sorry, Director Boyko just brought it up in his discussion. Sprout Lake Community Association is a grant and aid that is done by bylaw for Area D, and that is a society, but there was a referendum in their area. Area D only pays for it by parcel tax, and it's to support their Sprout Lake Community Hall. But that Sprout Lake Community Association did get a grant, but not the Marine Patrol.
Thank you. Director. Go ahead, Director Cote.
Just want to say that the Sprout Lake Marine Patrol actually went to a full referendum and was voted in favor, so to create that service.
Yeah, it was right before I got here, I think. Yeah. Heather, let's continue.
Okay. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so our grant and aid policy states that grant and aids are not guaranteed from year to year and that organizations are encouraged to work toward financial independence. However, in reality, the ACRD has provided grant and aid to several organizations on an ongoing basis. So for example, the Air Quality Council, as shown on the screen, has received between $10,000 and $12,000 through grant and aid district for the past 5 years. One option to consider is to enter into multi-year agreements. So this is done in some other regional districts and municipalities. I would suggest that if the board wants to consider this, that we would look at a term of 4 years that ends 1.5 years after each local general election. This would allow the new board that's elected to go through one budget cycle before being faced with the possibility of entering into further multi-year agreements. We would propose an operating agreement with whoever receives this type of grant and aid. It's basically like a contract, and they would have specific requirements that must be met. This could potentially involve changing the grant and aid policy to a wider policy, maybe a financial assistance policy, which could include grant and aids as well as multi-year agreements. And where it makes sense, and this was already discussed today, as we need to look at considering rolling in some services that, you know, should be services rather than grant and aids every year. And this Air Quality Council could be one of those that we consider in the future. We're doing a lot of climate action initiatives through the work that Amy Needham is doing. And so there could be the possibility of creating a service that encompasses the work, some of the work that she's doing, as well as incorporating Air Quality Council work. So where it makes sense, we should look at doing that. But I would caution that this is not a short-term thing, and this won't be resolved by the time that we need to make grant and aid decisions next year. So I'll pause there and ask for input on multi-year agreements.
Thank you. Dr. Roth, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of multi-year funding agreements for special organizations or specific organizations. It feels like it's special treatment. It goes against the idea or goal of financial independence that this is supposed to all be about, you know, people working towards financial independence. That's like almost becoming part of who they are by making it longer term. Actually, it's one of the policies perhaps we should look at. BC Gaming. It's year to year always. They don't want anyone to ever consider it part of their operating funds. They want it to be where you're working towards, you know, becoming self-sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, rather than multi-year agreements, wouldn't we want to just have a conversation about turning it into a service or not? Would that be an option?
I think so. I just don't know that that's going to fit for every option.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none, let's move on.
Okay, the grant and aid policy speaks to not duplicating services that are responsibility of another level of government. So for example, victim services. So they are funded by the province. Victim services, they have 150 programs across BC. They're serviced by victim services workers. They're trained to assist those who've been impacted by a crime or other serious trauma. The programs are provided in local RCMP detachments or municipal police stations and in nonprofit community organizations. All their services are provided free of charge. So we have funded victim services since at least 1997. This has been part of our policy that has been waived in the past because the services were provided by another level of government. The board could continue to waive this policy, or the policy could be changed. The funding that the regional district provides victim services allows them to provide a higher level of service. That's been in place since 1997. Higher level service than what the province provides. So if this funding wasn't available from the regional district, I would presume that they would need to drop their level of service. So I will stop there and ask for input on changing the policy or waiving the policy as has been done in the past.
Thank you. I have Dr. Roth and then Dr. Beckett. You are muted.
Okay, I'm very familiar with this victim support workers program and victim services programs because I work for an agency that has one. It's a nonprofit agency and I do their budgets. There's absolutely no funding from a regional district or any other local government. It all comes from the provincial government and it's fully funded. So I don't know why we're paying for this actually, and I don't think we should waive it. I think it should be where we stick to nonprofit registered societies only. I don't know, you know, perhaps they have to look at why maybe there's just, you know, like when you do the budget, there is an area where you can put that you receive other funding from other agencies, but there's not a requirement. It's only something that can happen if you want it to. So I'd like to leave the grant and aid program to nonprofit registered societies only. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further input? Dr. Beckett, please go ahead.
That's quite all right. Director Roth makes some valid points. I guess what I'm wondering is, based on Heather, what you explained is our local victim services who are funded by the province have suggested that it's not adequate funding in order to allow them to do what they believe is an essential component of their service. What have we done as a regional government or a community to assist them in becoming sustainable based on their desired level of service? So again, it's not answering or giving you a perspective on whether or not they should get it, but it speaks to creating that sustainability piece without it being a burden on regional taxpayers. Do you get my drift?
I think so, yes. Director Boyko, go ahead.
I think I got the drift of what Director Beckett's saying, is that a lot of these organizations receive funding from the provincial government for social services, and that they need to work within the budget they have in order to figure out how to budget like a business to not make money but not spend more than you have. It's like the regional district. We're not allowed to run a deficit, unlike the provincial and federal government. So you get this certain pile of money and you have to work within it to do it. And that's all you get. But should we provide responsibility or funds to services that get a higher level of government? We all know how much taxes went up this past year. I'm getting stopped on the side of the road from my constituents. What is going on after they got their tax notices this past week? And having an increase of money coming in from the regional people is not going to be well received. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we go on to the next item?
Okay, the next one is to consider grant and aid applications from nonprofit leaseholders. Specifically, we have one leaseholder at the Long Beach Airport who's a registered nonprofit, volunteer-based animal well-being organization providing animal services to the West Coast. They're currently paying below market rate for their lease at Long Beach Airport. It may be more appropriate to bring their lease up to market rate and consider a grant and aid to help offset their costs. We have never encouraged or had an application that I'm aware of from a leaseholder in the past. So I just wanted to throw this out as an idea, and with the board, just like your thoughts.
Okay, any input on how this might look? For me, the utility seems like it would, if you move this to a market rate for the airport, it makes the budget for the airport look more realistic to what it should be. But it just kind of move the money into a place where the discussion becomes who should pay, so on and so forth. I assume West Coast, but I think those are the conversations that we need to have. This is almost a category conversation. Director Roth, go ahead.
So this would be like an in-kind, maybe not a donation, but it would be relieving a nonprofit leaseholder of their obligation to pay rent. Is that what we're talking about? Because is that it?
So we're already giving them a deal on the lease for the airport space. The idea would be to bring that up to market. So like make that look like it's whole, and then potentially tell them to apply for a grant and aid instead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That seems
so
like a better idea, really.
from an accounting perspective, it does as well, because it doesn't make the airport look more like it's in a more dire situation when it's just somebody's getting a deal, right?
And they may or may not qualify. So that I think that's way better. Yeah. Thank you.
Director Boyko?
Thank you, Chair. So basically, you're looking at improving the finances of the airport, but the taxpayers pay more in grant and aids. Is that correct?
Or that maybe they do. Then maybe they don't pay at all because it might be rejected depending on the policy, right? So that's you port it over to a more appropriate place to have the discussion about helping a nonprofit, not in the airport budget, but in the grants and aid budget. So just so the conversation's in a more appropriate place right? So from an accounting perspective, and I think a transparency perspective, it makes more sense. Terry, go ahead.
It would just depend if what the buckets are, as we'll keep using that term. So if the bucket, if we have a West Coast bucket for grant and aid, and it's the same participants as the Long Beach Airport, then it would be the same. Will it tax more? No, it's probably just going to tax in a different spot, but it does make the fact that that land is at market rate. I think in some perspective, it will then make them even in terms of options of who you're renting to, because there might actually be more desire to market to a business out at the airport because we need the revenue, whereas it takes that part of the decision out of it and becomes a decision separate as part of the grant and aid process, and just requires them to be accountable, like the grant and aids were. I guess we could build that same language into the lease. It's just an issue that we're kind of running into, and just thought we'd ponder moving it into the grant and aid process.
Thank you. We have 2 more slides, so let's continue on.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is to talk about the application process. So currently, staff are just doing a cursory review to make sure that they've submitted the documents that they need to. But I think that there's room for improvement definitely on the application form and the final reporting requirements. But I also just want to talk about the double dipping. So we do have a statement in the policy that restricts double dipping. So what we do is we assess what the city of Port Alberni has awarded through their program, because they award before us. We just make sure that none of the applicants have already applied for the exact same thing. And then we generally just advise the District of Ucluelet and the District of Tofino of the grant needs that we have approved, because they normally do their review at the same time or later than us. So is there interest in still maintaining that double dipping policy? That's a question for the board to consider. And then there was some discussion through the budget process about having a better information about what the grant will actually be used for. So I think updating our forms to be more specific and ask for more specific information and detailed budget would be appropriate. And then final reporting requirements, we need to come up with a specific form and have specific requirements met. Currently, folks are providing a letter and some budgetary information to Terry at the end of each year, but I think I'd like to formalize that a bit more. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Director Roth, go ahead.
I'd like to know is it double dipping if an organization has 2 different asks? Like they might be asking the city for something and then the regional district for something else, but both within a grant and aid program.
Yeah, that's a good question, Director Roth. Like they're asking one group for helping on building something and then asking for help on a completely different aspect of what they do.
Yeah, so we
The
need to, I
policy-
guess.
Yeah, the policy says organizations that have applied to the city, Tofino and Ucluelet, will not be eligible for grant and aids through the regional district. So we could modify that to whatever the board chooses.
Thank you. We'll go to Director Boyko and then Terry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just thinking back to how many conversations we had over the past 3 months about double dipping and waiting for one budget, waiting for another one, blah, blah. It took a lot of time, and I believe it was probably a pain for a lot of the financial people waiting to hear what Tofino did, what Ucluelet did, what we were going to do, blah, blah, blah. I think we should clarify that no double dipping is allowed and full stop, move on and carry on. Thanks.
Thanks. Terry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that when our current grant and aid policy was developed, the municipalities didn't really have active grant and aid policies, whereas now they have kind of fully defined programs with very set parameters. And so I do kind of feel like it's a little bit different than when we were back then. I think that most we've seen double dipping, and we have had to exempt some organizations from the policy to allow it. They really are applying for different things. So I, from my perspective, would love to see that double dipping removed. I think we would still have the requirement for communication between the organizations. So I'll still be sending out to the municipalities what the board is considering and getting their input if they have any, and vice versa, asking for their listing as they develop it so we can provide it to the board. But I would agree. It is challenging, especially for those that have their processes at the exact same time as us. It's just hard to figure out. It's a chicken and egg game there for a bit. They're waiting to see what we do. We're waiting to see what they do, and no one's wanting to move first. So.
Thank you. Director Minions, then Director Sparrow.
Thank you. Could I just clarify, if somebody comes to the city and we approve a grant for them, and then they come to the regional district, the grant or the double dipping policy only prohibits the city from contributing again. It does not prohibit the rest of the region from, or that group from being eligible for a grant for the rest of the region. Is that how it currently reads? That's how I understood it.
That is how we've been doing it in practice. In the way it's written, it's just very vague. It doesn't really indicate, does that mean no one's contributing? It actually just says they can't apply. But we have had in the past where we are exempting them. The Drag Racing Association would be a good example. They had applied when they hosted it on Stamp or Third or whatever section you want to call that. The city had done a lot of work with them, and then we exempted it from our policy so that the rural areas could participate and provide a grant and aid. So again, I think clarity on that, and we were just looking to see if interest in double dipping is, again, double dipping, I don't even like the term, but is, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify then, my comment would be that I think that groups should absolutely be able to seek a grant from the city and separately from the region, as long as there's no double dipping in the actual payer. But I think there are a lot of groups who serve both and maybe have a habit of applying with the city and shouldn't be exempted from applying with the regional district. So that's how I would personally like to see it, that we just make sure there's no double dipping of actual payers.
Okay, thank you. I think that's good clarification. Dr. Sparrow, go ahead.
Thank you. So double dipping, if we break it away from our budget like we're trying to do, then they can apply for the city because they're not going to change their grant and aid time frame. So they apply for the city, and if they don't get there, they could reapply here, right? Could be a second process. So the same thing. Or if they only got half the money from the city, could they apply for us? Like, when you say double dipping, do you mean, you know, suppose they want 50 grand from the city, get 25 grand, can they apply again for us 50 grand and get 25 grand from us? Or is that considered double dipping? What do you clarify or quantify that as?
So under the rules as written, you're allowed to do that, but City of Port Alberni would not be a part of that 25 grand. So they'd be asking the rest of whoever they're applying to for the rest. And the thing is, Port Alberni would still be here, and they'd say, no, we already gave them 25 grand. Here's some information for you to make with as you will. Right. So it's not just the cards, it's how you play them too. So, I mean, there's still going to be communication. Director Minions, do you have your hand up again, or is it still up? Okay.
Oh, my mind's really not working today. Sorry.
If you're on a device too, it's different than on a computer. Yeah, and the thing is, that's a decision that we can make as a group too. And I think depending on the way we go with either the categories or buckets, or whether or not each individual community has their own bucket, I would argue that if we do that, then you almost do away with double dipping, because there's no real, if everyone just has their own bucket, then we should just do away with double dipping, because that'll be managed by the person who's at the table anyway. Then you're taking away from having to do work twice. But I think it just depends on, I think it's going to be more complicated than that. So we should probably have something on the books, but right now it's not clarified. I actually went back and looked too. It's not clear how that works. It's just like if Music by the Sea comes to Hawaii and asks for 5 grand, and we go, yeah, sure, but here's 15 instead, 1,500. And then they come here and ask for 5 grand. We treat that as separate, right? So I don't know what that might look like, but I think what happens at this point is we would need to look at the the examples and have communication between directors. So there's a governance aspect there too. It's not just information and briefing notes and policy. It's whether or not you actually want to. And there may be instances in which it's permissible because of the slight variation in what they're going for, right? And how they put together their application will matter too. So I think we should keep something on the books, but maybe clarify that it's like, as Director Minion says, the payer, the previous payer is not going to contribute unless they want to, which is a separate conversation entirely as well. Dr. Sparrow, go ahead.
Thank you. So we put our money into our little buckets, however we put in, and for some reason we don't spend it all. It's a carryover next year, right? And then the other token is if we do want to contribute more for some reason, something really good comes up, we can't because we're out of money and we gotta either reevaluate the whole thing or do something different. It'll make for an interesting conversation if we only have buckets.
Yeah, and I think that's the utility in having the conversation between everyone coming together and deciding whether or not we want to create one big bucket of 300 grand and then category buckets for each of the other ones, just in the event that we want to refer one application to a small bucket to the bigger one or whatever, right? It's more about setting up the tools that we would want to help, because there are some permutations where setting up a service won't work. Like in search and rescue is an example of that, because they're a fully formed thing. And if we were going to incorporate it into a service the same way as Sprout Lake, would they not have to be employees without adopting some sort of procurement changes as well, right?
I think we can do a grant and aid service, but we do need some form of public assent to get there. So there is an option and it wouldn't change how the society operates. It would just clearly be that this is a granting service to these organizations. But you would have to like AAP or referendum or something that to be able to establish that, but it wouldn't then make them directly governed under us.
Yeah, I just wouldn't want to pull on that burden, but if it's possible, then okay. Did I miss anybody? Sorry. Oh, Director Roth, please go ahead.
I just wanted to add that I'm very much in favor of having an individual electoral area bucket, mostly because this past year, that's what I tried to do. I created a budget myself of what I thought we could afford based on the information that we had for the budget, and tried to fit within it. And it could have worked really well, but it didn't. But it could have. Thanks.
All right, that's why we're having this conversation. So to incorporate those conversations and do a bit more with policy so that it's more clear and more straightforward. I don't think anybody's going to get 100% of what they want, though. That's just the nature of democracy, especially representative democracy. Last slide.
Thank you. The city of Port Alberni has always applied for a grant and aid through economic development. I think through the discussions at the grant and aid process this year, there was agreement that this doesn't fit well within the grant and aid. So all I really wanted to say is that further discussion is needed. I just think this should happen outside of this grant and aid conversation. So between the city and the regional district.
Yeah, this is almost a special case as well. Dr. Roth, go ahead.
I just wanted to agree. Thanks.
This is we didn't forget this part slide. And so thank you, staff. Okay, any further comments or questions before we finish the meeting? Dr. Sparrow, please go ahead.
Thank you. On that last slide, the economic development thing, would be better off if we created like the business case to see how much actual work they do for the regional district and the city, so we can sort of justify what he does for us. Because right now we're just sort of hoping and wishing what he does for us. We know we do something, but we have a quantitative ability to say what he does for us. Makes sense?
So we have done that in the past. I remember being grumpy and skeptical about that about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more. But we can definitely go through a process like that first. I think what we'd want to do is have a meeting with Pat to understand what's going on, and then have a meeting without Pat to figure out what value we actually want to see out of it. But I've come around to the value of agriculture, so that makes it a bit different. Dr. Roth and then Dr. Siga.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a final note, and it's something we didn't talk about, and it's nonprofits that serve low-income population. I wanted to note that people with low income are taxpayers too. And it doesn't make sense to take from people that are disadvantaged and poor to give to other people that are disadvantaged and poor. According to a 2023 report by the Alberni Valley Community Foundation, in 2020, 1 in 5 children and youth ages 0 to 17 years old lived in a low-income family. The same report says that this area has the highest child poverty rate in the province. So we always have to remember that our taxpayers, they're poor too, a lot of them. You know, there's working poor, there's disadvantage, and, you know, it's kind of funny when you start giving or taking from that same population when you're thinking you're helping them out. Thank you.
Thank you. One can argue that the tax system could be more progressive, so that doesn't impact lower income people more often, but I think that'll have difficulties rolling out. But that's a good point. Thank you. Dr. Siga and then Dr. Cote.
Thank you. Yeah, we didn't address the accountability piece in the discussion so far. I would really like to see a budget for the donated funds with the application, and then a statement when the funds are used at year end with the outcomes. To me, that's just basic accountability for funds received through the public. Thanks.
Thanks. I think we kind of touched on it in the first few slides, but we'll underline that for sure. Dr. Boyko and then Director Cote, then Dr. Boyko.
Thank you. Question around things that we talked about during budget. There was the continuation of services that we continue to provide grant and aids for that are sort of given around childcare, that the less fortunate, whatever, people that we donate to. There's that, and then there's also what happens. We talked about like how would we look at those, because they continue every year coming back. So it's not a grant and aid. That's why we turned the Marine Patrol into a service, is because it didn't act like a service. It was continuous. And then question around what happens when something special comes along for grant and aid that is not within our time frame. So how would we budget for that going forward? And would that be a grant and aid or something similar to the tall ships that came and it was a special event? So how would we treat special events? Thanks.
That's a good question. Thank you. Quickly, go ahead.
For sure. So if they know in advance, then we can definitely just consider it as part of our budgeting process. We can't anticipate anything, but I think that getting us some more solid goalposts is going to help this discussion. I think we discussed grant needs more than anything else in budget this past year. So it would be good to get that. And I think you'll still have the ability to consider those one-offs prior to the budget being adopted, for sure. I think that we wouldn't be encouraging that. And I think a lot of those things, like something the scale of the tall ships, we knew that was coming in advance, and the board could have discussion separately surrounding those. So it wouldn't stop us from that. It would just be for the regular routine stuff that we're seeing.
Thank you for that. Director Boyko.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what Director Cote just said regarding having grants go to organizations year over year after year that just becomes, hey, we're just giving these people money every year. The current policy says we're going to encourage people to be financially responsible and successful moving forward. So I still think there should be some kind of time frame, like a term limit. Say, hey, we're going to do this for you at this certain amount for 5 years, and then you're on your own. Or else this is going to keep going on for decades and decades, which is currently happening. I also agree with what Director Siga just said. regarding transparency and openness of what the grant money is used for. Is it just used for general expenses? Is it used to send members to conferences and just pay for all the expenses and hotels and flights? Or is it directly used to actually help people themselves? So having some openness and transparency on how the funds are used and benefit the community and the members themselves, not just the actual association, I think would be great to see. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Director Roth, did you have a comment? No? Okay. So with that, I think one thing that I'd like to explore is that we can create different types of grants that Director Boyko has alluded to. So if somebody's asking for a grant, we can give them a temporary grant. Like you're only going to get this much money and it's only going to come once. Something we do in Hawaii for something called a crisis grant. So we have the ability for citizens to apply, but they can only apply once per year, right? Or once for one thing per whatever the amount of time is, depending on what it is. So we can build in those kind of restrictions, and we can also build in the fact that if this is for this purpose, you can't apply next year for the same thing. You know, those kind of things can be built in. I would like to explore the different categories that lakes used, as well as that kind of small grant application, like under $500, might be treated differently, depending on what it is. Director Cote, last word?
Well, it's something that's come up in my community, request for repayable grants. So I don't know if that would be fit into this under grant aids. Things like a grant that a community member could borrow to assist to replace a septic field. So it could be repayable. So I'm just wondering if that would be under grant aids or something that this regional district could think about, because Sprout Lake might be interested in taking a look at that in the future to see if we could provide community members with a small grant, not the full cost, but to assist in replacement of a septic field that would be repayable, but maybe interest-free. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just right off the bat, Director Cote, you might be better off agreeing to put some money up to backstop loans from another organization like a credit union or the cooperators or something like that, because they do that in farming communities in the prairies in the States, where local governments can help backstop that. But for the most part, it's a lot of farmers who just work together. That's where the cooperators came from, right? So those might be a better use. Just getting into loans like that, it creates a lot of work and difficulty, because Hawaiian tried and it's not a good idea. Director Boyko, go ahead, and then that'll be last word. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that. Thank you, Chair. I don't know if the ACRD is interested in becoming a bank essentially and providing interest-free loans to people, when there's also lots of other organizations, but we're not a bank. We're just a local government trying to reduce taxes. Thank you.
All right, with that, I think we have quite a good conversation, so maybe a few different options can be brought to the board. Let's have a menu. I think this isn't something where we recommend only one system, and I think maybe creating your recommendations in a modular format might be a really good idea. It just saves us time, I think. So with that, I'd like to thank you for the work. I let my tablet die. I think that's it for the. Yeah. Are there any comments or questions on the email address?
There's no emails and there's nobody in the audience, but there is comments received in Zoom, so I will read them out. I don't think they're relevant to the topic, but I will just read them out from Charlene Lack. As this is a cow meeting, I wish to add my comments and questions to the board. I have done this in person, but I would have done this in person, but appointments are scheduled. I shall continue. Why do the taxpayers have to pay for 3 ACRD employees to complete OCPs when the provincial government just ups and changes the rules as they are doing with the implementation of Bill 44? Also, my tax, although many think it is low at $753, it did go up 46.2% from last year, $1,550. Remember in Cherry Creek that we still pay for water and fire separately, which makes my taxes to almost $2,000. Also, when one is on the welfare seniors pension plan, as I refer to this, an extra $750 payment for this month devastates my checkbook. Regarding Director Penny Cote's comment in a previous meeting that how will the taxpayers feel when they see the board not acting like a team? I would like to say this is great to see some of the directors representing the taxpayers' wishes and not just follow the provincial government's carrots. I am looking forward to seeing district directors pooling together and taking the newly proposed transit system you are promoting. Or better yet, actively participating in the proposed active transportation like bicycles and skateboards to attend meetings. Thank you, that's it.
Okay, thank you for that. Since it's irrelevant to the thing at hand, we'll just take that in hand. A lot of that was just questions answered by themselves, so it seems more a comment than a question. Do we have a motion to adjourn, please? Thank you. Director Roth, seconded by Director Sparrow. All those in favor? Motion carried. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good morning.
Okay, see you everyone.